So, Chapter 25 of Boruto's 2 Blue Vortex has officially dropped, and as you can tell, I'm not home. No, I'm in Round Rock, Texas, a suburb of Austin for Colossal Con, Texas, and I'm currently engaging with, I'm gonna say, my jankiest ever recording setup ever. I don't know if you can tell there's a mirror behind me and an infinite amount of nicks, but I'm using a mirror's light to light my face right now. Yeah, things aren't great, but the grind never stops, and Chapter 25 of 2 Blue Vortex deserves to be talked about. See, because, well, a lot of this chapter is dedicated to Sarada and Sumire battling over who's gonna get Boruto in the end. We also get a pretty crazy look into how Himawari is training with Kurama. We get to see whether or not Boruto is hanging out in Konoha or heading back to Kashinkoji, and Momoshiki has been seen for the first time since the beginning of 2 Blue Vortex, and not in a way that any of us anticipated. Boruto's life is on the line, but this time it's on his terms. So, well, yes, a lot of Chapter 25 isn't incredible. There's some huge hits in here. So with no further ado, let's get directly into Chapter 25 of 2 Blue Vortex Explained. But before we get to explaining anything, guys, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. And if you're looking for one additional NC Hammer 23 video a week, you can go ahead and find my Naruto reaction series using the fourth wall link in my description below. We're in the Forest of Death, and that curse mark is curse marking. So rather insanely, usually the way that leaks work for Boruto is that we get 2 official leaks from the Boruto team, 1 page at a time, and then usually the raws will come out, and then somebody will translate them, and then somebody will put them all together. However, this week, both the raws and the translations came out before we got both of the official leaks from the Boruto team, which is insane. I should not be filming this video this soon, but here I am. So Chapter 25 picks up where Chapter 24 logically left off, with the first page of the chapter actually being the first official leak that we got from the Boruto team. See, because in the first page of Chapter 25, we see Konoha standing with Moegi Soulthorn alongside Team 10 plus Himawari, who I guess is just an extension of Team 10 now. And we see Konoha looking apprehensive for a moment before he plunges the Soulthorn into Moegi's failed divine tree. Now, after plunging the Soulthorn into the tree, thorn side first, the Soulthorn buries its way into the wood of the tree and disappears, creating a almost sun-like symbol from the thorns that existed around the side of the Soulthorn and the Rinnegan. Now, this is rather interesting here because the imagery drawing our minds to a sun could mean a lot of things. The mind rather obviously wanders to this possible connection to Sarada and maybe the way that she'll be able to counteract the power of the Shinju, but I don't have enough to truly formulate a theory on this just quite yet. Obviously, when you see just one big old Rinnegan, you tend to think of like Hagoromo's forehead, but like I said, not enough to formulate. Anyways, after the Soulthorn has completely buried itself into the divine tree of Moegi, smoke begins to rise out of the tree, and immediately the tree disappears, and out crashes Moegi, appropriately into the arms of Konoha. Now, Konoha is conveniently apparently way taller than Moegi. I didn't know Konoha was like 6'3". Looks down at Moegi and says, "Moegi, do you recognize me?" And there's a brief moment of tension as all of Team 10 looks on, waiting to see if Moegi is gonna crash out of this tree with no memories or maybe even possibly evil. But almost as fast as Moegi falls out of the tree into Konohamaru's arms, she looks up at Konohamaru and says, Konohamaru, almost apprehensively, but then when she realizes that she's safe, she once again says his name and says, Konohamaru. Now, obviously, in Japanese, she's saying Konohamaru-chan, which was a big talking point revolving around Matsuri and Konohamaru's relationship, because Matsuri wanted to call Konohamaru Konohamaru-chan, but Konohamaru was like, yeah, no, only Moegi's allowed to call me that, which made Matsuri really upset, and it's what made Matsuri try to kill Konohamaru. So this is an obvious callback to that moment. And Konohamaru didn't go 0 for 2 with bad Moegi-adjacent girls. I almost fully anticipated him catching Moegi in this moment, being like, yeah, no, the Konohamaru-chan thing's still not really working for me, Chief. Anyways, after Moegi realizes that she's safe in the arms of Konohamaru, and Team 10 all begin to celebrate the fact that Moegi, their sensei, is back, we see high up in the sky is floating Boruto. Now, this is interesting, right? Because one would assume that Boruto would have just dropped off Team 7 in Konoha and then dipped back to Kashinkoji. I mean, regardless of the fact that Team 7 and Shikamaru and a lot of the people in Konoha know that Boruto is one of the good guys and is absolutely an ally in the battle against the Shinju, he is still wanted by the elders and the feudal lord. He shouldn't be in Konoha. However, really the only person who's able to detect his chakra within the confines of Konoha is Kawaki, who is actively working with Boruto. So there's really nothing rushing rushing him out just quite yet, which is why he's hanging around and making sure that everything's gonna be okay. We then cut to the village hidden in the sand, and apparently everything went off without a hitch in terms of Araya getting Shinki's soul thorn back to him. Well, we had been theorizing that possibly the fight that Inujin gets in one of Orochimaru's dilapidated caves could be tied to possible complications on trying to unlock Shinki from his failed divine tree. It seems as though that's not the case, because as soon as we pop over to the village hidden in the sand, we tap into a conversation between Kankuro and Shikamaru, where Kankuro is telling Shikamaru that Shinki is completely fine after being released from the failed divine tree, and that Gaara is also safe. He's heavily injured, but not fatally so, but because of the sealing jutsu that Shinki put him in, he still hasn't regained his consciousness. However, Kankuro believes that he should wake up soon, and therefore, everything's fine with the village hidden in the sand. And like, that's fine, but it kind of begs the question of why did we go to the village hidden in the sand in the first place? Like, yes, Gaara's unconscious, but eventually he'll wake up, and Shinki has been released from his divine tree and is now completely fine. But like, so far as I can understand, Shinki has no kind of power up, and there's really no road for Shinki to be re-involved in the story. And thus we kind of just involved Gaara and Shinki and Araya and Yodo so that we could get a death of some circumstance with Yodo, and like maybe see what was going on with Araya and Gaara, and reintroduce Shinki in the story through Ryu. But now that Ryu's gone, Shinki's being sidelined by not even being shown in this chapter. See, I kind of want Shinki to be injected in the story because Shinki is interesting, just like Gaara was interesting. But it seems as though their arc is over. And that's fine, I guess. I mean, we barely get enough screen time for Himawari, who deserves way more screen time than Shinki, but still, just kind of a weird choice to me. Anyways, we then cut back to Shikamaru, who, upon hearing that Shinki and Gaara are both okay, says, okay, cool, that's all that matters, thanks for telling me. But then Sai opens the door to the Hokage's office and tells Shikamaru that the feudal lord is waiting for him. And thus Shikamaru tells Sai, okay, I'll be right there. Now, this probably pertains to the fact that Shikamaru has been openly working with Ada and kind of Boruto, and the feudal lord is not happy about that whatsoever, as it's very much been established that the feudal lord and the elders believe that Boruto killed Naruto, and therefore Boruto deserves death. Now, I believe that in the next couple of chapters, we'll probably see Shikamaru trying to make a case for Boruto as an ally against the Shinju, and as to how that conversation will go, I can't really say, but I can see a future where Shikamaru is actually deposed from his role as Hokage. It's something that the feudal lord and the elders have already threatened if the Boruto situation wasn't handled in a way that they deemed appropriate, and the Boruto situation hasn't been handled at all. We then cut over to the Konoha hospital, where Inujin was not just a couple of chapters ago, and see all of Team 10 and Sumire and Konohamaru crowded around Moegi's hospital bed. And Sakura begins to engage in the only thing that she apparently does for the plot anymore, which is reading off other people's injuries, as she tells us that there's no sign of any damage to Moegi's muscles or bones, and that overall her health seems great. However, there is one caveat, and that caveat is that her chakra flow is blocked, which Sakura hypothesizes comes from the fact that the divine tree was siphoning off her chakra. Now, this is interesting because we've been speculating for a while now that those who were released from the failed divine trees would actually see upgrades, not downgrades. And yet this chapter has only revealed to us that Shinki is normal and that Moegi no longer has chakra flow. So best case scenario is you're returned back to your original state, and worst case scenario is you can't use chakra. And while Moegi's chakra flow could return at any moment, and maybe her chakra flow will return better than ever, unfortunately, this chapter kind of kills the theory that getting caught up in a divine tree could be good for you in the long haul. And therefore, it kind of kills the theory that Sasuke could be released from his divine tree prison stronger than he went in. Because we've been speculating that the divine tree prison that Sasuke is currently in could do things like return his lost arm or fix his destroyed 6-tome Rinnegan. And while neither Shinki nor Moegi went into their divine tree prison with serious injuries like Sasuke, the fact that they're just coming out as they went in does not make that theory look great, if we're being honest. And while like that's fine, I guess, it just seemed like a real layup way to one, reintroduce Sasuke into the story in a meaningful capacity, and two, give characters that have no chance of being relevant on the battlefield, like Shinki or Moegi, a chance to be relevant on the battlefield. And while there is still that chance, it's just the window is closing. Now, Sakura goes on to say that as for the symptoms that Moegi has, it basically just boils down to mild malnutrition, so Moegi should just eat and rest, and everybody celebrates because Moegi isn't part tree anymore. So Moegi looks at this group of people who are absolutely violating the hospital's visitation rules and says, hey guys, I'm sorry I made all of you stress out. And specifically, she thanks Konohamaru, so it's kind of a lock that they're gonna end up together. Hanabi, ex-Konohamaru fans, eat your heart out. All 3 of you. Kind of does raise the question of who Hanabi's gonna end up with. I hope to God it's not Udon, but it probably will be. I don't think the snot-powered guy deserves love. I don't think that's a crazy opinion to have. He's an adult. He should have figured out some other jutsu to use. Anyways, Konoha Maru playing it super nonchalant and cool, just like, yeah, just heal up and get better so I can bring you to a different kind of bed. And Sarada and Sumire capitalize on this awkward sexual tension to bring some awkward tension of their own into the room. As they catch each other's eyes from across the room, and with both of their faces sweating, Sarada asks Sumire if they can talk. But don't worry, when they leave the room, it doesn't get any less tense, because as the two of them return to their favorite spot in all of Konoha, the scenic outlook that apparently nobody but them knows about, Sumire awkwardly kicks off the conversation by saying, hey, good work out there. That was a dangerous mission. To which Sarada stutters out the response of, yeah, more or less. Now, it's this point that Sumire tries to start talking, but Sarada cuts her off by calling Sumire by her first name, something that Sarada has never done before. Because to everybody, Sumire has always been class rep, not Sumire, class rep. Now, Sumire is kind of taken aback by this because, like I just said, Sarada and really nobody has ever called her Sumire before. Pretty much the only people who ever called her by her name are people who didn't serve in class with her, like Amado. Now, immediately after calling Sumire by her first name, Sarada begins to apologize, saying that she's sorry for everything and that she was being insensitive. Now, as to what she's referencing is the moment when Sarada and Sumire are both at this scenic overlook, and Boruto popped up in front of them and was like, hey, I'm back, and Sarada immediately dashed into his arms. Now, this moment made Sumire really upset because she believed that open show of affection to Boruto in front of her was insensitive to Sumire's feelings for Boruto. And the Sarada and Sumire have kind of been at odds because both of them have very obvious feelings for Boruto, but Sarada's pretty far in the lead. Now, Sumire sees Sarada's apology and says, I'll see your apology and add my own on top of it, apologizing to Sarada for being so blunt in her admission of her feelings for Boruto. Basically, Sumire is feeling apologetic for confronting Sarada in the first place. Sarada continues with her explanation and her apology for hugging Boruto and tells Sumire that in that moment she was just so taken aback by the fact that Boruto had returned to the village, which is objectively fair. She hadn't seen him in 3 years, and thus she didn't know how to respond, and her body moved on its own. It's at this point that we see that Ada is doing the thing that Ada always does when it comes to conversations between Sarada and Sumire, and that's spying. I would say it's impolite, but at this point, basically everybody in Konoha knows whatever you say, Ada's gonna hear it. So, is it impolite? I'm still gonna go with yes. Living in Konoha is essentially like living in the Love Island villa. Whatever you say is caught on camera. Now, the rest of what Sarada and Sumire says is kind of rambly and doesn't make all that much sense, and that might be the fan translation here. But basically, Sarada continues on by saying, anyways, what you said was basically spot on, in reference to what Sumire said when she said that Sarada was being insensitive about her feelings to Boruto. And Sarada continues on by saying, and your feelings are valid, and you were right about my shortcomings. I kept turning away from all these harsh realities that I didn't want to acknowledge. I didn't want to acknowledge that I was stepping on your feet when expressing my feelings for Boruto in front of you. I didn't even want to acknowledge my own feelings for Boruto. But you were one of the first people to ever recognize that I did have feelings for Boruto, maybe even before I recognized it. And it's at this point that we get a flashback to pre-time skip where Sumire is asking Sarada if she cares about Boruto. And in that moment, Sarada basically tells Sumire that yeah, she cares about Boruto, but what she cares about more than anything else is becoming Hokage. And in a flashback to the present, Sarada says that what she says back then, she absolutely believes it. However, she admits to Sumire that at that moment in time, she hadn't even considered how she actually feels about Boruto, like as to whether or not she had any special feelings towards him. But at some point, presumably during the time skip, Sarada found herself spending more and more time thinking about Boruto. And she just recently realized how much time she's been spending thinking about him. Now, she begins to explain to Sumire that Boruto was always carrying around some kind of problem, and as his teammate, she naturally worried about him because of that. However, at some point, it evolved into something more than that, and she began to wonder to herself if she was just worried about him as a teammate, or if it had evolved. Now, Sarada then begins to go in a somewhat downward spiral, as she says to Sumire that the fact that she's even thinking about this kind of stuff makes her feel like a failure. That someone like her, who wants to become the Hokage one day, would be hung up on how they feel about some boy, makes her wonder if she's even truly worthy of aiming to be Hokage. And it's this point that we see the flashback of the conversation she had with the dying Yodo before she unlocked the true potential of her MS, where Yodo told her that she was lying to herself. Now, Sumire tries to get a word in here, but like Sumire trying to get a word in with Boruto, Sarada shuts that down immediately, as Sarada continues on by saying, but I've stopped doing that kind of thing. I need to trust in the feelings that I have and in the goals and aspirations that I have. I like Boruto too. Boom, mic drop. I'm not gonna do it. This is expensive. But yeah, Sarada essentially admits to the thing that all of us knew, which is that she wants to end up with Boruto, which all but confirms that she's going to end up with Boruto. Ikimoto is doing the thing that Kishimoto was too much of a coward to do, and that's shipping his two main characters. Now, everybody involved in this conversation, that being Sarada, Sumire, Ada, are all temporarily too stunned to speak. But after Sarada gives everybody a second to do a dramatic pause, Sarada continues on by saying, that feeling that I want to be somebody who's able to support him, that feeling itself makes me stronger. Even as the Hokage, I believe I could be the Hokage and still have this feeling. And that's how I've come to feel. And honestly, that's kind of cool. Essentially, what we're establishing here is that there's no reason that Sarada can't want to become the leader of Konoha, but also have feelings for somebody in her life. There's no reason for her to be confined to one path. She doesn't have to choose between her career and love. She can choose both. She's competent and powerful, and she's entitled to her feelings. And honestly, this conversation makes my mind wander back to Tsunade, because Tsunade was thrust into a very similar situation with Jiraiya, where because she was the 5th Hokage, she really didn't have the opportunity to explore her relationship with Jiraiya now that the two of them were both back in Konoha and had no other romantic prospects. And because of that, before she got a chance to be with the person that she probably always was meant to be with, Jiraiya unfortunately died. And thus it's cool to see another prominent female character in Naruto with aspirations of becoming Hokage not have to run into that potential issue. Now, Sumire does eventually get a chance to get a word in here as she says, yeah, I've known that for a while. It's incredibly obvious that you like Boruto, like literally everyone knows. But Sarada says, Sumire, yeah, but it's also very obvious that you like Boruto. I mean, you got upset that I hugged him. But as the two of them acknowledge not only that they both like Boruto, but that they both know that each other likes Boruto, Sumire thanks Sarada for telling her, but tells Sarada that now the training gloves are off. That essentially Sumire is no longer gonna hold back in her unabashed feelings for Boruto, which should make for some interesting scenarios, I guess. Like, what does an unleashed Sumire look like if she's trying to get Boruto's attention? Probably no different. And did I think a Naruto IP was ever gonna have a love triangle for the main character of the story? No, probably not. But when you consider the fact that a large part of part 1 of Naruto is dedicating to Sakura and Ino fighting over Sasuke, it's not the craziest timeline change of all time. Now, Ada, who's apparently pissed that she wasn't involved in this conversation because she has kind of been involved in all the other conversations between Sarada and Sumire, tells the sensory captain, presumably Ino, to connect her to these two girls immediately, which seems like a blatant misuse of Konoha assets, but I guess it's Ada and she gets to do what she wants. And while I would love to sit here and do another 20 pages on feelings time, fortunately after this conversation wraps up about who wants to be with the absentee main character, we cut to the Uzumaki household, which mind you only has one person living in it right now. And that one person is Himawari. Thank God, we need more Himawari time. Now we see that Himawari is sitting crisscross applesauce on the Uzumaki couch, doing some form of meditating, but apparently that form of meditating that Himawari is doing is actually some kind of astral projection inside of herself, where she's battling against what appears to be, at least to me, a bigger version of Kurama. If the Kurama that we saw the first time that Kurama was revealed inside of Himawari was maybe like 6, 7 years old in terms of like a full-grown adult, I'm thinking we're looking at like preteen, maybe 13-year-old, 14-year-old Kurama right now, which to me indicates that Kurama is amassing his chakra inside of Himawari relatively quickly, which to me makes sense. Himawari should have a fully powered Kurama by the end of the story. That's just writing 101. But unfortunately for Himawari, the stronger that Kurama gets, the bigger the power gap between the two of them widens. And as Himawari lunges at Kurama, trying to land a blow on him, we see him rather easily swipe her away with one of his tails. Now it's this point that Kurama begins to lecture Himawari, saying, no, you're doing everything wrong. It's not about throwing punches with brute strength. It's about focusing your chakra. Don't try to leap at me with just the strength of your legs. Understanding the flow of chakra and using it to amplify your strength and speed is fundamental to the acquirement of power. But in response to this verbal tongue lashing that Kurama does give Himawari, Himawari says, well, yeah, of course I understand that. I am a ninja after all. But here's the thing, she doesn't understand that, or at least she shouldn't. The application of chakra to increase your speed or strength isn't something that we really see ninjas from Naruto instill until post-time skip. And even in that moment, in the second bell test, when Kakashi is testing Naruto and Sakura being able to increase her strength through the application of chakra in specific areas of her body is seen as a high-level technique by Kakashi. Such a high-level technique that Kakashi revels at it and believes that Sakura has the potential to be stronger than Tsunade. High-level application of chakra to increase your speed or strength is something that requires insane chakra control. The chakra control of medical ninjutsu users. enforcers. And therefore the idea that Himawari, who just started training to be a ninja a couple of years ago, would be able to pull that off is kind of insane. Especially when we consider the fact that over the course of the last couple of years that she's been training to be a ninja, Kurama's chakra has been amassing in her, most likely making it more difficult for her to control her chakra. As we know that Naruto struggled with chakra control because Kurama's chakra was constantly leaking into him. Now, the relationship that Himawari has with Kurama is massively different than what part 1 Naruto had with Kurama, but still. Anyways, Kurama continues on by saying, "No, you don't understand anything at all, and you are far from an ordinary shinobi. You are a rare case, one who houses a tailed beast inside of them, a Jinchuriki." Then Kurama stops himself and says, "No, you're something more." Now, this is the second time that this kind of rhetoric has been spun around Himawari. See, because Juro did not identify Himawari as Jinchuriki. He said rather she was closer to him than she was a standard Jinchuriki. That is to say that Juro saw a whole lot of similarity between himself as the Ten Tails and Himawari. And Kurama doubles down on this sentiment, as Kurama says, "Though you are human, I would say you're actually closer to us, the Bijou." Once again, like I just said, doubling down on the idea that for some reason, somehow, Himawari is closer to a tailed beast than she is a Jinchuriki. Now, as to whether or not that's a good thing, I can't really say, because it's been established multiple times throughout Naruto's timeline that a Jinchuriki, a perfect Jinchuriki, is stronger than just a full-fledged ninja or a tailed beast, as a perfect Jinchuriki acts as a harmony between these two entities to create a new level of power. And therefore, Himawari not falling under the categorization of Jinchuriki makes me believe that there is some capacity for potentially to be weaker than a perfect Jinchuriki, but I don't think that's the route we're going to take here. But as to how Himawari basically just being Kurama could possibly make her more powerful than Naruto's iteration of being a Jinchuriki, I have yet to see. Now, there is the possibility that maybe Himawari exists as her own tailed beast, as a Jinchuriki of a tailed beast like Kurama, and therefore as a pseudo-fusion of two tailed beasts, Himawari will be able to achieve a power that far surpasses that of Naruto, because Naruto is, after all, just a human. But if you want to hear more about that theory, then you're gonna have to hit that noti bell, because that's gonna be our next video. Now, Kurama continues yelling at a child, which is pretty much his favorite pastime, if we're being real, by saying it's not about whether or not you're stylish. The point that I'm trying to drill into you is that the fundamentals are key. We need to learn individual stances to build upon. And this is just the beginning of your instruction. Throw away common sense. Think about yourself as a reincarnation of just chakra. Everything that we're gonna build starts from there. Once again, this is an interesting rhetoric, because Kurama telling Himawari to think about herself as just chakra once again ties back into that idea of her being a tailed beast, because tailed beasts are just chakra. So as to why Himawari could possibly exist or even be thought about as just chakra, well, I don't know, or at least right now, I don't know, which is why you're gonna have to tap into that next video. Now, none of this is clicking with Himawari, as she tells Kurama that regardless of how many times you tell me all this, it's not gonna stick in my head. But Kurama, who's apparently done with having conversations with children and not just eating them, says, yeah, whatever, okay, fine, we're done for today, I'll see you later, and severs the connection between him and Himawari, causing Himawari to awake in her living room. And after Himawari looks around and calls out to the Nine Tails to make a connection back with her, we see that Boruto is actually watching over Himawari from a building adjacent to his old house, once again solidifying the idea that Boruto's not being chased out of Konoha, because once again, really the only person who can do that to him is Kawaki, or Delta, and both of them are on his side now. Now, it is kind of nice to see that Boruto is trying to keep an eye on Himawari. I mean, it is his little sister. He probably misses her, because while Boruto didn't have a whole lot of love for Naruto at all of the points in part 1, he always loved Himawari. In fact, pretty much the most upset we ever see Boruto with Naruto is when Naruto misses Himawari's birthday. Now, Naruto, possibly inspired by Himawari's ability to connect to Kurama inside of her, closes his eyes and begins to meditate. And then we see Boruto awake in some kind of destroyed battlefield. And as we pan out, we realize this destroyed battlefield is exactly where Boruto, Naruto, Sasuke, and all the other Kage defeated fused Momoshiki, the remnants of a cut-down divine tree blasted away by a gigantic Rasengan. And laying on the edge of all of this destruction is Momoshiki. Yes, the character we haven't seen in 25 chapters. It's been 2+ years. Momoshiki, rather casually, in a sulking way, says, my, what'd the wind blowin' today? To think you'd be the one to make contact. Implying that while Momoshiki has been present inside of Boruto, they've both kind of just been ignoring each other. Ever since Momoshiki failed to take over Boruto's body when Boruto activated his karma marking when Sasuke was battling against Code, two of them have just kind of been living like a married couple that hate each other. Now Boruto, who has no love lost for Momoshiki, says, yo, freeloader, you still sulking around? Momoshiki, who looks absolutely miserable, says, once again, you've managed to escape death. And because you're still so shamelessly holding on to life, as you can see, I am in the depths of despair. The moment you were killed by Kawaki, I shouldn't have reincarnated you. Because the moment I brought you back to life, my reincarnation became impossible. The only thing my lost soul now desires is death. That is to say that Momoshiki understands that Boruto is not going to give over his body to him at any point in time, and thus Momoshiki simply wants Boruto to die so that he can die. Momoshiki has been completely and thoroughly defeated in the mental long game by Boruto, because Momoshiki understands that any and all opportunities to take over Boruto's body, like the activation of Boruto's karma marking, simply won't come to pass, as Boruto has pushed himself to never use his karma marking. But we know sometime in the possibly near future that Boruto does use his karma marking, and this right here is the moment that sets that up. Boruto, after listening to Momoshiki's sad rant, says, "I've got a proposal for you. Just this one time, will you lend me your strength?" Now this pisses Momoshiki off because Momoshiki hates Boruto. He doesn't want to help him, and thus he says, "Don't make me laugh, disappear." Boruto says, "Wait, I'm not asking for you to do this for free." Boruto then continues on by saying, "If you manage to take down Jura, I'll give you this body of mine," essentially calling on Momoshiki's power, which is apparently greater than that of Jura's, and a Hail Mary attempt to destroy Jura with the promise that if he does destroy Jura, well then Boruto's body is Momoshiki's. Now this is interesting because Boruto understands that if Boruto gives his body over to Momoshiki, that Momoshiki would try to destroy the world. And while Jura is currently trying to destroy the world, if Momoshiki's combined power with that of Boruto's is great enough to overcome Jura, why would you want to make a threat that is greater than Jura that might just want to do the same thing as Jura? And really, I can only think of a couple of different explanations here. One, Boruto is going to use some caveat to not give over his body to Momoshiki. Two, he believes that the combined forces of everybody else on Earth will be able to defeat him. Or three, Boruto is going to use his karma marking to implant on some clone made somewhere to upload his consciousness to a different body and then defeat the evil version of Boruto. That is, say, the Momoshiki version. And as crazy as it sounds, I believe all three of those options are equally possible, which is why you gotta hit that noti bell because we're uploading that video in just a couple of days. That's the last thing that we hear from Boruto and Momoshiki in this chapter, as we cut away from one of the most interesting things to happen in all of Two Blue Vortex to Sarada and Sumire as they walk through the streets, once again friends, talking about how there's no way that Boruto has ever noticed their feelings, but how even though that is kind of frustrating, they don't really mind all that much. And with that, chapter 25 of Two Blue Vortex comes to a close. A chapter of love interest, deadly deals, and important training that I believe is operating as a buffer between two arcs. Now that the Ryu and Matsuri arc has closed, I believe up next is the Mamushi arc. And then after Mamushi is done and dealt with, most likely by Daemon, we're on to Jura and Hidari, and possibly Momoshiki. I'm curious to hear from you guys. What did you think about this chapter? Did you enjoy it? Was it too much Sarada and Sumire? And what do you think's going on with Boruto and Momoshiki? Let me know in the comments below. And while you guys are down there, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. Now, if you'll excuse me, come here, you. Come here. Come here. Me and Odysseus here have to go enjoy Round Rock Colossal God Texas. Goodbye.